I won't drag you through the backstory of how I met my wife, Lila. We crossed paths in high school, things escalated quickly, and we married as soon as I landed a stable job. We've been married for 18 years and have 3 children. Sophie, our 17-year-old daughter, and twin boys, Ethan and Liam, born 2 years later. Life seemed good, at least that's what I thought. Apparently, I was the only one under that impression. Lila's discontent had been brewing for years, and today, she decided to unleash it all at once. I work as the sole electronics and data processing manager for a small manufacturing firm, a position I earned after 10 grueling years. But I wasn't satisfied with just climbing the corporate ladder. Most of my free time was spent working with my best friend, Derek, to develop a server system that would enable instant communication over vast distances. We'd made significant strides on the software side, even if our hardware progress lagged behind. The system was almost ready for launch. Unfortunately, none of that ambition seemed to matter to Lila. Today, she dropped her bombshell. "John, this is simple," she started, her voice alarmingly calm. "I just want $500 a month in child support. You can keep the house, the furniture, everything else." I stared at her, barely believing what I was hearing. She had been talking for 15 minutes, but it was only now that her words began to register. $500? I repeated, my tone sharp. "That sounds absurdly low for 3 kids. Lila sighed, as if she was exhausted by my presence. "It's just for Sophie, and only until she turns 18. I think it's fair." My expression hardened. "And what about Ethan and Liam? You're taking them too, aren't you?" "Of course I am. But you don't owe child support for them, because they're not yours." The words hit like a sledgehammer, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I narrowed my eyes and clenched my jaw. "Not mine?" I asked coldly, daring her to elaborate. Her response was a casual shrug, as though this revelation was no more significant than announcing the weather. "I assumed you'd figured that out by now." My voice turned icy. "No, Lila, I didn't. Because unlike you, I'm not the type of person who spends 16 years lying and scheming. Care to tell me who their father is?" She didn't hesitate. "Edward Hale." I let out a bitter laugh, devoid of humor. "Edward Hale," I repeated. "Your longtime family friend? And I suppose you've been screwing him behind my back for as long as they've been alive?" "Yes," she admitted without shame. "And I don't regret it." The sheer audacity of her response made my blood boil. "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. "And where are you planning to go now? Into his house, I assume?" "That's right," she replied bluntly. "He's finalizing his divorce, so it makes sense for us to be together now." I stared at her with a mix of disgust and disdain. "So you wrecked not just our family but his too? What about Nina and his daughters? Or do they not matter in your little fantasy?" "Nina left him," she said flatly. "She took the girls and moved out after catching Edward and me in bed. Their marriage was over. And now you think you'll just waltz off into the sunset with him?" I asked, my tone heavy with contempt. "You're a piece of work, Lila. Do you even hear yourself?" Her expression didn't waver. "I didn't ask for a divorce before, because Edward was still married. Now that he's free, it's practical." "Practical?" I repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. "You've destroyed 2 marriages, betrayed your husband for over a decade, and your excuse is that it's practical?" She rolled her eyes, clearly unfazed by my anger. "I'm sorry, John, but you're not enough for me. Edward is rich, successful, and everything you'll never be. I want more out of life, and he can give it to me. You can't." Her bluntness didn't wound me. It enraged me. "And yet for 18 years you had no problem enjoying the home I paid for, raising the family I built, and living a lie. You disgust me, Lila." She shrugged again, as if my words didn't matter. "I don't care what you think. I've made my decision, and I'm not looking back." I leaned forward, my voice low and menacing. "Then hear this. Sophie is staying with me every weekend and during all school breaks, including summer. That's not negotiable. And if you try to fight me on it, I'll make sure everyone, our kids, your family, Edward's ex-wife, knows exactly what kind of person you are." For the first time, she hesitated. "Fine," she said finally. "If Sophie agrees, I won't fight it. Good, I snapped. Now, get out of my house. She turned to leave, but I stopped her one last time. Oh, and Lila? Don't think for a second that I'm going to make this easy for you. You've burned every bridge here, and when Edward gets tired of you, and he will, you'll have no one left. Her only response was to slam the door behind her. I didn't reach for a beer or wallow in self-pity. Instead, I sat down at my desk and started making calls. If Lila thought she could destroy everything I'd built without consequences, she was in for a rude awakening. I didn't have time to dwell on Lila's betrayal or the wreckage she'd left behind. My focus was on reclaiming control of my life, and more importantly, ensuring Sophie was protected from the fallout. The twins? If they thought I was going to sit quietly while they disrespected me under their mother's influence, they had another thing coming. The King family had been in our social circle for years, but I always saw Edward for what he was, an opportunist with more money than character. His father, Foster Hale, built a family fortune on carpets, practically owning the flooring market in our town. Edward inherited the business, but unlike his father, he let his wealth inflate his ego and diminish his integrity. Once his bank account swelled, he started drifting away from the rest of us, only showing up to a handful of gatherings over the past few years. Apparently, that didn't stop him from sneaking into my life where it mattered most. The sound of Sophie's key in the door broke my train of thought. She walked in with her usual energy, but her expression shifted when she saw me home. "Hey, Dad, what are you doing here?" "Where's Mom?" she asked, tossing her bag down and kicking off her shoes. I rose from the recliner, empty bottles in hand. "Your mother asked me to come home for lunch, so she could inform me she's leaving. She wants a divorce," I said bluntly. Sophie froze mid-step. "She what?" "She's moving in with Edward Hale, and she's taking your brothers with her," I continued, watching her expression turn from shock to quiet anger. She folded her arms and leaned against the wall. "So, that explains the midday drinking. You didn't see it coming, did you?" "No, Sophie. Apparently, your brothers knew, but I was the last to figure it out." "Typical," I said bitterly. She sighed, grabbed the bottles from my hand, and carried them to the kitchen. "Well, that tracks. Brian and Liam joke about it all the time. Every time you try to discipline them, they laugh about how they're not your problem. I always thought it was disgusting." Her words hit a nerve, but I kept my tone steady. "And you've known this whole time?" "Yeah," she admitted, returning to the room and sitting cross-legged on the floor. "I didn't want to bring it up. You seemed happy, and I didn't want to mess things up. But when Nina and the girls left for Lancaster after catching Mr. Hale and Mom together, I figured it was just a matter of time." "You could have said something," I said, my tone sterner than I intended. Sophie shrugged. "What good would it have done? Mom's been checked out for years. Besides, I'd rather stay here with you. She can have the boys, but I'm not living in that house." "That's not an option," I said firmly. "The courts won't allow it. I fought for what I could. You'll stay here every weekend, on all school breaks, and during the summer. That's the deal." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "I can make that work." "Good. Now go take a shower and unwind. I'll order pizza," I said, moving to the kitchen to make the call. While we ate, Sophie laid out her plans for how she'd split her time. She wanted to make it clear that she wasn't interested in the luxuries of Edward's mansion on the hill. She described her schedule with the precision of someone determined not to let Lila's chaos derail her life. Friday nights at my house, every weekend, every holiday. It was better than I could have hoped for. The boys? I wasn't holding my breath for them to show any loyalty. They had made it clear for years where their allegiance lay, and I wasn't about to waste my energy chasing after them. My priority was Sophie, and ensuring Lila didn't drag her into the same moral vacuum she seemed to thrive in. As Sophie and I talked through the logistics of the separation, my resolve hardened. Lila and Edward thought they could dictate the terms of this new arrangement, but they were about to learn that I wasn't the same naive husband who tolerated their lies for 16 years. If they wanted to fight, I was more than ready to give them one. The phone rang, interrupting the quiet. I let it go to voicemail, but couldn't resist checking the message. "John, I just wanted to let you know the boys are here and will be staying overnight. Tomorrow, while you're at work, the kids and I will move the rest of our things over here. They can afford to miss a day of school." Sophie can spend the evening deciding what she wants to bring with her and what she wants to leave there. I don't see any reason why we can't start the new arrangement right away. Do you? The audacity of Lila's tone made my jaw tighten, acting as if she was still in control, like her betrayal was just a casual event, grated on me. I kept my response short and clipped when I called back. No, that sounds fine. I'll let Sophie know. The truth? I was relieved to have the house to myself again. It felt like shedding dead weight, though the realization of how long I'd lived under her lies still gnawed at me. I wasn't about to waste time wallowing, though. If I wanted to move forward, I needed to focus on what mattered: my work and Sophie. At the office, concentration didn't come easily. Thoughts of Lila's duplicity swirled in my head, not out of regret, but anger at being kept in the dark for so long. Her deceit wasn't just personal, it was public. The humiliation of being blindsided by someone I trusted sickened me. My friend Derek and his wife Beth tried offering their support. "We're here if you need to vent," Beth had said. But I had no interest in venting. Sympathy wouldn't fix anything, and booze, though tempting, felt like a crutch I didn't need. Instead, I poured my energy into the server project with Derek. It was my ticket to something better, and nothing, not even this mess of a divorce, was going to derail it. Beth wasn't thrilled about Derek working even longer hours, and I ended up sending him home more than once to keep the peace. But the work paid off. The divorce papers were filed, and Sophie started spending her weekends with me. She never spoke ill of her mother, but the absence of any praise told me everything I needed to know. Despite her annoyance at how much time I spent working on the server, Sophie quietly took on the household tasks Lila had abandoned. It wasn't my intention for her to shoulder the load, but she seemed glad to stay busy when she wasn't studying for her SATs. I always made time to sit down for meals with her. Those moments mattered more than anything. Late that spring, things started to shift. Sophie was accepted to the University of Oregon and approved for a senior year abroad in Spain. She was excited but hesitant, worried Lila might refuse to sign the necessary paperwork. Her concern baffled me until she explained that she hadn't told her mother about her college applications or her exchange program request. "Why the hell didn't you tell her?" I asked. "She doesn't care," Sophie replied bluntly. "I didn't want her finding some way to ruin it." At my suggestion, Sophie approached Lila with the permission slip for the trip, framing it as just a simple class outing. True to form, Lila signed it without even reading the details. A week later, we submitted Sophie's passport application. By then, the divorce was finalized. Lila got what she wanted: Edward and her shiny new life. I got the house, and more importantly, my freedom. Edward was still knee-deep in legal battles with Nina, who was determined to take everything she could. I had to respect her grit. Nina wasn't letting him off easy. With the server project nearing completion, Beth used her graphic design skills to prepare a professional presentation for potential clients. We pulled together a sleek slideshow and handouts, which paid off in spades. Within a week, we landed a contract with the state's Turnpike Commission, along with a hefty paycheck. It was a turning point. I quit my job to focus entirely on the project. Without a family to support, the stability of a 9 to 5 didn't matter anymore. Derek, still balancing his day job, worked nights and weekends to keep things running. Beth's attitude shifted as she announced her pregnancy, and her support for our work grew. We hired college students to assist with the installation, and within 6 weeks, we had a fully operational system. Though a few glitches remained, the client was thrilled. 2 days later, the State Department of Corrections called to schedule a meeting. The momentum was building, and Derek quit his job to dedicate himself fully to the business. The timing couldn't have been better. A week after wrapping up the first major contract, I escorted Sophie to Barcelona. It wasn't just a trip. It was a chance to step away from the chaos and focus on her future. She was nervous, but having me there helped. I needed the break as much as she did. Lila, of course, was livid when she found out about the trip. Her anger only intensified when I stopped sending her the support checks. It wasn't about money. I could afford to keep paying. But why should I? It was worth every penny to see her fume. All I had to do was hold firm for a few more months. Once Sophie turned 18, Lila wouldn't get a dime more from me. The business was growing faster than Derek, and I could keep up with. Inquiries poured in daily, and I found myself traveling constantly, meeting potential clients and overseeing installations. Derek managed things on the home front, and Beth quickly took charge of our newly rented office. She seemed relieved that I was doing most of the traveling, though balancing the workload while preparing for the baby wasn't easy. We hired office help early, ensuring they were trained and ready by the time Beth needed to step back. Our lawyer, who had proved indispensable during my divorce, recommended we incorporate. He subcontracted the task to a professional firm in Philadelphia, which handled everything seamlessly. The business was thriving beyond our expectations. The house, however, felt hollow without Sophie. I could endure the loneliness for a few days because I knew she'd be back on weekends. The rest of my time was spent working, sending emails, and making international calls. It was easier to stay busy than to dwell on the emptiness left by Lila and the twins. I hadn't heard a word from them in months, and that was perfectly fine by me. That Christmas, I spent 2 weeks in Spain with Sophie. It was a welcome reprieve, and the time together reminded me of what truly mattered. Sophie was thriving, excited about her upcoming college adventure at the University of Oregon, and the trip was everything we needed. Lila, predictably, threw a fit when she learned about the trip and the fact that I had stopped sending support checks. I didn't care. Let her fume. The countdown to Sophie's 18th birthday had begun, and once that day arrived, Lila would get nothing more from me. Back at home, I settled into a routine when I wasn't traveling. Mornings started at the same diner, where I became a familiar fixture in my usual seat. Between client meetings, I found myself increasingly bitter about my marriage and the humiliation I'd endured. Lila had spent 15 years deceiving me while parading her betrayal right under my nose. I didn't just want closure, I wanted satisfaction. And when an opportunity arose, I wasn't about to let it slip away. A small item buried on the third page of the local paper caught my attention. Philip Hughes sues King Carpets for improper termination. Hughes had worked for Foster Hale, Edward's father, for over a decade and stayed on after Foster retired. But Edward, true to his arrogant nature, had shifted the business to cheaper materials and shoddy workmanship. When Hughes refused to accept the changes, Edward fired him. The lawsuit was weak, and Hughes didn't stand much chance of winning, but the article sparked an idea. I reached out to Hughes and arranged a meeting. He was a decent man who had always dreamed of starting his own carpet business, but lacked the funds and support. It took me 10 minutes to convince him to drop the lawsuit and partner with me instead. Derek and Beth agreed it was a smart investment, and within weeks we had a deal. Hughes would run the new company, Empire Carpet, with our financial backing. His only competition in the area was Edward's King Carpets and 2 big box stores. With his expertise and customer-first approach, Hughes was confident he could hold his own. 6 months later, Empire Carpet was fully operational and turning a profit. Meanwhile, Derek and I had expanded our server business into 6 states. Our system was proving to be a perfect fit for government operations with multiple locations. The best part? We didn't even have to advertise. Word of mouth kept the business growing faster than we could handle. Monthly checks rolled in, and though the workload was overwhelming, the satisfaction of success was worth every sleepless night. Then came the news about the twins. Brian and Liam had been arrested for selling drugs, with most of their dealings taking place at their high school. The call came from the authorities, and it took our lawyer half a day to convince them that I wasn't legally responsible for their actions. By the end of the day, papers were filed to officially relieve me of all parental responsibilities for the boys. That evening, Lila called, her voice dripping with fury. "How could you do this to your own sons?" I cut her off mid-rant. "Don't you dare try to lecture me, Lila. Those boys made their choices under your roof and your influence. I'm done cleaning up your messes. You want to defend them? Be my guest. But I'm out." I hung up without waiting for a reply and turned off my phone. The boys would be 18 soon and legally responsible for their own lives. My obligations to them ended now, and I felt no guilt about it. They'd made their choices, just like Lila had, and I wasn't about to let their mistakes derail my progress. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control of my life. After 2 years in business, the company hit an unexpected milestone. 2 inquiries came in from California, including one from Serpentine Enterprises, a tech powerhouse in Palo Alto. They made an offer we couldn't refuse, $60 million in cash, plus stock options, to acquire our company. The deal was a no-brainer. Derek agreed to stay on with Serpentine at a salary so outrageous even Beth, who had often pushed back against his long hours, threatened to divorce him if he didn't take it. The young engineers who had joined us early on became instant millionaires before their 25th birthdays. For me, the decision was simple. I retired. The day the for sale sign went up on my front lawn, I saw a van pull into the driveway. It was one of those customized models with a wheelchair ramp on the side. From the porch, I watched as a sharp-looking Latina woman exited the driver's seat and operated the ramp with practiced ease. Moments later, an older man in a motorized cart rolled up the sidewalk. Despite the years, I recognized him immediately. Foster Hale, the retired founder of King Carpets. The cart stopped short at the steps, so I stepped down to meet him. "Do you know who I am, young man?" he asked, his tone sharp but not unkind. I smiled, flattered at being called young. Maybe it was his way of catching me off guard. "Of course I know who you are. I've seen your commercials. You sure did get old, though." His stern expression softened into a grin at my cheeky response. "Smartass," he muttered, shifting in his seat. "I need a beer. Got any cold ones in a bottle? Not one of those damn cans?" "There's a few Fosters in the fridge. Want to come inside? Or should I bring them out here?" "Maya can get them. Sit down. We need to talk," he said, nodding toward the woman who had driven him. She stepped past me and disappeared inside without a word. I sat on the porch steps, my curiosity piqued. Foster clearly wasn't here for a friendly chat, and the intensity in his eyes told me this wasn't a casual visit. As I watched Maya disappear inside, I couldn't help but notice her confident stride, the curve of her back. She wasn't petite, but she was well-proportioned and carried herself with ease. "Easy there, boy," Foster said with a snicker, catching me mid-glance. "She'll be back soon." I cleared my throat. "No offense, but she's quite attractive." "Why the hell do you think I hired her?" he retorted with a smirk. "I hope it wasn't just to seduce me," I shot back. "In your dreams, kid. She's more woman than you could handle." We were laughing like old friends by the time Maya returned, carrying 2 long necks. She gave us a curious look as we abruptly stopped. "You didn't come here to drink my beer, Mr. Hale," I said, taking a bottle. "What can I do for you?" Maya leaned casually against the porch railing, one leg perched slightly higher. Foster caught my wandering eyes again and let out a chuckle. "You're causing me some big problems, Mr. Terrell," he said, his voice dropping. "A good chunk of my retirement income comes from King Carpets, but profits have been going down lately. Turns out you might be the reason. I figured I'd give you a chance to explain yourself before I have you killed." Maya shot him a sharp look. "Foster, behave. You promised not to pull any of that nonsense." "Apologize." Fine, he grumbled, finishing his beer with a dramatic swig. "Sorry, John. Just wanted to get your attention. I promise I won't have you whacked," he added, slipping into a mock Italian accent. "Who did you talk to before coming here?" I asked, folding my arms. "Last night, I had dinner with my idiot son and that sleazy woman he's shacking up with," Foster replied. "According to Edward, you're the root of all his problems." Of course, he didn't give me any actual facts, just rambled on about how you're out for revenge. I got fed up and left early. Didn't even get to see my granddaughters. Before I could respond, Maya leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Foster nodded and straightened. "John," he said, his tone now serious. "Tell me what's really going on here. I want to hear your side of the story." Maya leaned in and whispered something into Foster's ear. His reaction was immediate. He smacked his hand against the arm of his cart with a sharp crack. "That explains everything," he barked. "Why the hell didn't you tell me that last night, Maya? Sometimes I wonder what I pay you for." She didn't even flinch, her response calm and measured. "You pay me because I'm the only one who puts up with you." Foster turned back to me, his expression softening slightly. "Mr. Terrell, I didn't realize the woman staying with my son was your ex-wife. I apologize for calling her sleazy. Though honestly, I can't imagine why you'd be upset with Edward for taking her off your hands. Seems to me you'd be thanking him." I chuckled dryly. "You're not wrong. I never particularly liked her. but let's just say the circumstances left a bad taste in my mouth. Foster grunted in agreement, shifting in his seat. She got pretty huffy when I asked Langford where my granddaughters were. Joyce and the girls are staying with her parents in Lancaster, I replied. She's a good woman. Your son, on the other hand? Not a fan. Foster gave me a look that suggested he wasn't either, but he said nothing. All this is fascinating, I added, but I assume you're here for more than beer and gossip. He nodded. You're sharp. Did you talk to Philip Hughes yet? No. Why would I? I asked, leaning forward. Is he someone I should trust? If so, wouldn't he be able to give you the answers you're looking for? Foster fell silent, his mind clearly working through the implications. After a long pause, he finally muttered, Can I have another beer? No, Maya interrupted, her voice firm and final. She stood straighter, arms crossed, clearly the one in charge of Foster's well-being. Foster sighed, giving in. Fine, I'm leaving tomorrow. I'll talk to Philip, and I'm going to visit my granddaughters. Without waiting for assistance, Foster powered his cart toward the van. Maya hurried after him, moving with an easy grace that caught my attention again. As she helped him into the van, Foster glanced back at me. Don't leave town, John Terrell. We still have business. I watched them pull away, Foster's parting words lingering in my mind. The visit had been enlightening, but it was Maya who had truly left an impression. Later, as I stood under the cold spray of the shower, I found myself thinking about her more than I should have. She was probably married, or with someone far younger and fitter than me, but it didn't stop me from daydreaming. That evening, another unexpected visitor showed up. Lila. What the hell are you doing, John? She demanded the moment I opened the door. Langford says you're behind this Empire carpet fiasco. I told him it had to be a mistake, but he insists you're trying to drive him out of business. King Carpets has been a fixture in this town since we were kids, Lila, I replied, keeping my tone calm and measured. I don't know a damn thing about carpets. Why would I have anything to do with it? Don't play dumb with me, she snapped. I know you better than that. You and Derek own the building Empire Carpet is in, and your names are on all the startup documents. Langford's friends found it all out easily. I smirked. You're right. I never could fool you, could I? Well, she demanded. Are you going to stop this? Hell no, I said, my voice cold. Derek and I have too much money invested to walk away now. If I were you, I'd pay attention. Things might get even worse for Edward in the coming days. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean by that? How could it possibly get worse? I shrugged. I don't know. Forget I said anything. The seed was planted. Lila's face twisted with disgust as she turned toward the door. The way you treated Brian and Liam after their arrest was terrible, she said, glaring at me. You raised those boys, and they deserved more compassion than you showed. I expected better from you. I crossed my arms, unbothered. When did you tell them I wasn't their father? Is that really important? She snapped. I think so. She hesitated, then sighed. About 3 years ago, they caught Langford and me having coffee off Bleecker Street. Things got heated, so I decided it was the perfect time to tell them the truth. They took it better than I expected. Interesting, I said, smiling faintly. That explains a lot. Lila looked momentarily thrown off by my calm response, but recovered quickly. By the way, I'm seeing Sophie tomorrow. Should I say hello for you? Don't bother, she said sharply. She's made it clear I failed as a wife and mother. Fine. I'll take care of my boys, and you can keep pampering your precious daughter. With that, she stormed out, leaving the door swinging behind her. I closed it gently, the faint smile still on my face. Lila's bitterness was her burden, not mine. Sophie had risen above it all, and I had no doubt she'd continue to do so. The past was dead weight, and I had no intention of carrying it any further. The door slammed behind Lila, and I didn't waste a second dwelling on her bitter exit. Instead, I packed my things and prepared for my trip to visit Sophie. Spending the week with her was exactly what I needed. She took time away from her studies to show me all her favorite spots within a 100-mile radius. Her excitement about life was infectious, and though I missed her dearly, I was proud of how well she was doing. During one of our conversations, Sophie revealed her plan to stay in the area after graduation. It didn't surprise me. She was building a life for herself, one rooted in her passion and hard work. That sense of pride stayed with me even as I said goodbye and returned home. Back in town, I discovered Foster King had been busy. For a man confined to a motorized cart, he moved mountains when it came to his family's affairs. Whether he truly needed the cart or used it to elicit sympathy, I couldn't say, but his influence was undeniable. In just 1 week, Joyce King had secured the sharpest lawyers in the state and was back in her old home. Meanwhile, Langford and Lila were living out of suitcases in a dingy motel. The boys? I had no clue where they were, and I didn't care. Last I'd heard, they'd been expelled from school and were awaiting trial. It wasn't my problem anymore. Joyce wasn't pulling any punches. She'd sent Langford and Lila's belongings to a storage facility without a second thought. As for my plans to use Philip Hughes to undermine King Carpets, those came to an abrupt halt. I learned that Langford had never truly owned the company. Foster had kept it in his name the entire time. Not only that, but he'd held on to full control of the business, even though he hadn't exercised it in years. Philip Hughes left several messages on my answering machine, insisting we needed to talk. As it turned out, Philip and Joyce were more than acquaintances. They were friends. Close friends. Close enough to confide in one another, which explained a lot. Foster, having been briefed by Philip on Langford's mismanagement and mistreatment of Joyce, took swift action. He fired Langford, obtained a court order barring him from the business, and revoked his company car. In a surprising twist, Foster appointed Joyce as the new manager of King Carpets. Joyce, however, lacked experience in the carpet business. Her solution? Turning to Philip for help. Philip was torn, his loyalty to me and Derek conflicted with his desire to assist Joyce. In the end, he sought my guidance, unsure how to balance the two. Meanwhile, my life was shifting. My realtor had 2 offers on my house, one of which included a cash payment with possession in 30 days. I accepted. With Sophie thriving in college, Derek and Beth relocated to California, and the business sold, I had no reason to stay. As the realtor hammered the sold sign into the yard, Lila pulled into the driveway. She stood there, staring at the sign for what felt like an eternity before finally walking up. "Is it a done deal, or are they waiting on financing or credit approval?" she asked, her tone unusually subdued. "It's a lock," I replied flatly. "They paid cash. I'll be out by the end of the week. Why do you care?" "Joyce got some fancy lawyer and stole Langford's house. We're looking for a place to rent until we can buy something else. I thought maybe you'd let us rent this one." I couldn't help the smirk that crept onto my face. "Sorry, you're too late. But I'm sure with all of Langford's money, you'll find something suitable." Her expression soured, but she didn't argue. She turned and walked back to her car, and that's when I noticed the Alamo car rental sticker on the bumper. The mighty had truly fallen. That evening, Philip Hughes and Joyce King paid me a visit. Their camaraderie was obvious, and it didn't take long for us to strike an agreement. Empire Carpets would become Empire Floors, specializing in tile and wood flooring. King Carpets, under Joyce's management, would focus solely on carpets. Philip assured me there would be no issues managing both operations, provided Derek and I agreed. He even floated the idea that King Carpets might buy out Empire Floors after a few years. A clever move that earned an approving nod from Joyce, though her slight blush didn't go unnoticed. Most of the furniture and other household items I hadn't sold, I donated to the Salvation Army, including most of my clothes. It felt like a good time for a fresh start, and a new wardrobe was part of that. By the time I was done, everything I owned fit neatly into my car. I spent a full day tying up loose ends, closing accounts, paying off any lingering debts, and ensuring I left nothing undone. That's when Foster King got hold of my cell phone number. He insisted I join him for dinner that evening, my last day in town. Despite his gruff demeanor, I was actually looking forward to seeing him, and if I were honest, Maya too. Dinner began with Foster, giving me a detailed account of his meetings with Philip and Joyce. He was unapologetic about the steps he had taken against Langford. The boy deserved every bit of it, he said, his tone firm. He also thanked me for allowing Philip to help Joyce. I listened politely, though my attention kept drifting to Maya. She wore a stunning gray-green dress that made her eyes shine, and her hair and makeup were flawless. Foster, of course, caught me staring. He paused mid-sentence, clearly amused. "See something interesting, John?" he teased with a grin. I gave a sheepish smile, but before I could respond, Foster laughed heartily. Maya, however, stayed out of the conversation, her focus shifting to managing Foster's dining habits. She stopped him from ordering another drink and outright refused his request for dessert. He faked a pout, but mumbled a good-natured complaint under his breath. When Maya excused herself to the restroom, Foster saw his chance. "What are your plans after the house is sold?" he asked. "It's sold," I replied. "I'm heading to San Francisco tomorrow morning to visit Elton and Beth. They just had a baby girl and named her Johnny, after me. How could I not go? And after that, I don't know," I said with a shrug. "I'll leave my car at the airport, and after visiting Elton, I'll just drive south and see where I end up." Foster shook his head. "I have a better idea. Come and stay with me in West Palm Beach. My house is far too big for just me, and frankly, I hate seeing Maya alone all the time." "What are you getting at, Foster?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Maya lost her husband in a car accident 3 years ago. She doesn't have many friends in West Palm Beach, and her chances of meeting someone worthwhile aren't great. You're the first man I've seen her take an interest in." I frowned. "Did she say something?" "No," Foster admitted, "but I've seen the way she looks at you. She perks up whenever I mention your name. Come stay with us for a month. If nothing happens, you're free to move on. You've got nothing to lose, and I'd enjoy the company." Maya returned before I could answer, smiling knowingly as if she suspected we'd been up to something mischievous. By the time the evening ended, I had already made up my mind. I was going to West Palm Beach. My visit to San Francisco went perfectly. Elton and Beth were thriving, and their company's new owners had expanded the business into over 20 states and multiple overseas markets. The stock options they'd given us were shaping up to be worth far more than the cash we'd received. Their daughter, Johnny, was adorable, and though I suspected she might curse them for the name one day, I vowed to be the best godfather she could ever have. Before leaving town, I called Philip to check in. He reassured me that the business was running smoothly and updated me on Langford's situation. Apparently, Langford's personal debts, divorce costs, and legal fees for Brian and Liam had left him penniless. He had no credit, no assets, and no prospects. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. As for Lila, she'd vanished without a trace. Neither Jessica nor I heard from her again. 2 days later, I arrived in West Palm Beach. Foster's waterfront mansion exceeded my expectations, sprawling, luxurious, and immaculately kept. Foster wasted no time throwing Maya and me together. He insisted she show me every restaurant in South Florida. We humored him at first, but after a while, we started pretending to go out while staying in and watching TV at the beach house instead. Dining out every night sounded glamorous, but the reality was far less appealing. Foster seemed to know what we were doing, but didn't mind. He was just happy to see us spending time together. By the 3rd week, Maya and I had grown closer. We started sharing a bed, and Foster, of course, noticed. He teased us relentlessly, stopping only after I moved into her bedroom permanently. His satisfaction at seeing us happy was almost comical. Life felt surreal. My finances were in perfect order, my investments were thriving, and I was living rent-free in a mansion with an incredible woman by my side. Joyce's divorce was finalized around the same time, and Philip wasted no time moving in with her. As for Langford and Lila, their story had taken a predictably dismal turn. Lila briefly resurfaced to ask me for help covering Brian and Liam's legal expenses. I gave her $10,000 just to get rid of her, and I never saw her or the boys again. Jessica graduated and moved to Barcelona, where I suspected she'd met someone special. I couldn't have been prouder of her. Foster, however, was declining. 2 years later, he passed away. There was no autopsy, and I never learned what had been wrong with him. Before his death, he updated his will. He left his assets to his granddaughters, held in trust until they turned 25, and passed the business to Joyce on the condition that she marry within a year. The West Palm Beach house went to Maya under the same stipulation. Things hadn't gone as I'd originally planned, but I had no complaints. Maya and I were engaged before the year was out, and she soon became pregnant. When our daughter was born, we named her Foster Maria Terrell. As for Brian and Liam, they tried their luck in Mexico, but failed spectacularly. Their poor decisions were no longer my concern. Life, for once, was better than I ever imagined.